There's a very well-known story about compassion that comes from the Buddhist tradition. I've probably used it at some point in my preaching. It says that once upon a time, a thief snuck into the room where a Buddhist monk was sleeping. As the burglar rummaged around, the monk woke up, and the startled thief ran into the cold, wet streets. The monk chased after him. "Please stop, wait!" A chase ensued down the street. Finally, the burglar stopped, realizing that this monk probably wasn't going to hurt him. And the monk said, "Here, you'll need this," giving him his coat. "What do you mean?" the man asked. And the monk said, "I saw that you dashed out from my room into the cold winter without as much as a winter jacket, and I realized I had both my woolen blanket and my coat." It's a memorable, though somewhat implausible story. No one likes being taken advantage of, not even monks. As I was reading more about that story, the minister Geoffrey Lockwood compares this story to a family ski trip. He and his wife were headed into the mountains with their 4-year-old and 6-year-old children. In their rush of the 3-hour drive to get to the mountains, they had forgotten mittens for one of the children. And his wife jumped into mother mode with inspiring practicality and speed. The solution to her was obvious. She always wore 2 pairs of socks, so she quickly removed the outer layer of thick wool socks and pulled them over the child's hands. Problem solved. The day of skiing was saved. Lockwood said that his wife's practical compassion reminded him of the way that story finishes, that story with the Buddhist monk. In the end, the robber replied to the monk's generosity, saying, "But you're a fool to give away your coat, leaving you with only a blanket." And the monk said, "If I had 2 gloves on one hand and none on the other, would I be a fool to put one of them on my bare hand?" The man said nothing. He took the coat and hurried down the street. "If I had 2 gloves on one hand and none on the other, would I be a fool to put one of them on my bare hand?" In discussions of compassion, we talk a lot about giving away our coat to others in need. We don't talk as often about the necessity of keeping the blanket, the necessity of warmth for ourselves. Embracing the interdependent web of all existence, remembering that we're simply different parts of the same body, we come to generosity for others. We also remember in our giving that there must be balance. Sometimes we need to show ourselves a little generosity too. If I had 2 gloves on one hand and none on the other, would I be a fool to put one of them on my bare hand? In many ways, today marks the peak of the holiday season. While life is abuzz with Christmas fever, tonight is the first night of Hanukkah, and last night was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. This is literally the darkest time of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. It's not a huge deal here in Southern California, but in Alaska or in Northern Europe, they get the pleasure of warm sunshine only a few hours a day. It's no surprise that so many holidays converge in this darkest week of the year. We need a little light to get through the darkness. And when we pass the threshold of the solstice and we make it to the morning, this morning, we have great cause to celebrate the return of the sun. Like I said, we're not lighting any candles for Hanukkah today, but because it's an evening ritual. But I want to remind us a little bit of where that story grows out of, the darkness that was occurring then. It was the year 168 BC, and the Syrian tyrant Antiochus Epiphanes sent his soldiers to Jerusalem. And Syrians desecrated the Jewish temple. For Jews in that moment, the temple was the singular holiest place on earth. God literally lived in that temple. And when the Syrians took it over, they brought their altars and idols of Greek gods. Antiochus offered two options: conversion or death. In the midst of that invasion, a resistance movement emerged, led by the Maccabees, a family. Judah Maccabee became the chief strategist and military leader of that resistance. And though they were outnumbered, Judah Maccabee and his fighters won two major battles, beating the Syrians against all odds. So Hanukkah evokes images of Jewish valor against overwhelming odds against the Syrians. It also celebrates holding on to culture in the midst of oppression. And that word, Hanukkah, means rededication. It's a festival that commemorates the purification and rededication of their temple in Jerusalem. It seems so fitting for the holiday commemorating hope in the darkest of times this week. Holidays are emotionally complicated. The contrast of the dark and the light. Last Sunday, as folks were leaving, I heard a parent tell her young child with such wisdom, "It's okay to be sad." I get a sense that sometimes we need to hear those words as adults as well. There's a poem that I have come across by Edward Frost that talks a little bit about this Christmas season and recognizes both that joy and that sadness. He writes, "I suspect that the Christmas spirit is memory, personal yet universal. Shared collections of shards of other days, pieced together in this season by common consent, marking the otherwise commercial venture religious, communal, making it holy as by memory we are recreated, born again." So the bittersweet of this time, since memory and that recalled are at best mixed blessings. I sit before our Christmas tree with years of former selves gathered, chattering of how it was in their time, asking, "Remember when?" At Christmas, I am all my children, all my years of former selves come home, who have sung carols, opened presents, given gifts of perfume and aftershave, or lay listening through sleepless holy nights. All my children crowd and dance about as I hurry from place to place, clutching, tugging, plucking, holding, shouting, "Wait, wait, look, remember when?" My children, my spirits of Christmas past, who make of all my seasons one. I tell them stories, they tell me truths, and sweet innocence of truth's pain. My family of self reunited, come bringing gifts of memory, too young to know the sadness of too much memory unwrapped. We sing together at Christmas. Thank you. We sing together at Christmas, I and all my children, voices above distant murmurings from other rooms, and another child is born. In this multi-layered season of darkness and festivity, I want to invite us to practice a little compassion for ourselves. We spend a serious chunk of time worrying about gifts for others, but don't forget to keep at least a blanket for yourself. when you give your coat away. I think empathy and compassion are sometimes misunderstood as traits that you either have or you don't have. Good people have it, bad people don't. There are monks that give their coats away, and then there are the rest of us. But that's not really how virtue operates. Virtues grow through effort. Compassion isn't just something that happens in a rush of synapses in our brains. It's a choice that we make to pay attention, to extend ourselves. Compassion is made of exertion as much as predisposition. Sometimes we care for another because we should, or because it's asked for. And that sense of obligation doesn't make our caring hollow. It's just a choice. Compassion is a practice, and so is self-compassion. I want to talk to you about a couple of opportunities to practice self-compassion. One unusual one comes from Barbara Brown Taylor. She recommends that from time to time, we take our clothes off, look at ourselves in the mirror, and tell ourselves with as much tenderness as we can, "Here I am. This is the body like no other that my life has shaped. I live here. This is my soul's address." Facing ourselves in the mirror with some measure of gentleness, much less reverence, is a hard assignment. Many of us have learned early on that we are either too much or not enough. Many of us grow up believing that essential parts of us are unacceptable. The way we look or feel or talk or love or learn. And we never seem to fully unlearn that shame. It's deeply spiritual work to put down some of that self-loathing for a moment. It's deep spiritual work to learn to look at ourselves with compassion, to see ourselves, if just for a minute, the way we would look at something beautiful. A newborn baby, the ocean, a sunset. Now, mirrors might be a little elaborate for your meditation practices. For me, one of the simplest and most fruitful ways of practicing self-compassion is mindfulness meditation. It's basically the exercise of clearing your mind for a period. And probably better than clearing your mind, we might think of letting go of your thoughts. There are a bunch of different ways of doing it, focusing on breathing, using mantras. I've done a lot of them over the years. Lately, I've taken a gentler approach. I've just invited my body and my mind to rest. Rest from the Rolodex of anxieties and appointments. Rest from concerns of tomorrow or thoughts of the past. Rest from wondering, am I doing this right? For just maybe 5-10 minutes. You don't have to sit in a particular way to get it right. You don't have to breathe in a particular way. Just rest. So this week, as we're dazzled by the brightness of celebrations, as we're chilled by the darkness of the season and the layers of memories it may evoke, this week I hope that you find some time to rest in a way that feeds your soul. It may not feel like it quite yet, but we made it through the darkest, longest night. The sun will soon warm us, and that is good. Amen.